if you were interested in truly understanding something, this is the greatest time to be alive.
That's Steven Johnson, and he's the co-founder and editorial director of Google's NotebookLM, which is one of the most interesting AI products out there. It radically changes how we learn, how we remember things, and could also change how we write in the age of AI. There's a fear right now about cognitive offloading that is relying too heavily on AI to think for you, and that's a very real risk, especially in school settings. But Steven says we should also be talking about what you can gain from cognitive uploading. In other words, like Steven, you can use AI to create a second brain, and you can stuff it full of all the things you might otherwise forget. And then you can prompt it and find amazing new connections.
I don't know why, but that's not yet part of the popular conversation about AI. And it may be because people aren't using it the right way yet, and they don't have those kind of memory collections, second brain collections, the way a smaller group of people do. But boy, if you do maintain that kind of archive of your thinking and of ideas that influenced you, it's incredibly powerful.
Welcome to Future Around and Find Out, where we explore how we can steer the future in the right direction. Two things before we dig in. First, please share the show with a friend. That is the best way for podcasts to grow. And second, sign up for our newsletter. Go to futurearound.com. Okay, so it's kind of a wild story how Steven landed at Google. Steven is the author of more than a dozen books, and they often explore major technological innovations or how those innovations come about, something he explored in Where Good Ideas Come From. 4 years ago, Steven wrote a piece in the New York Times Magazine about AI. This was about 6 months before the world would shake with the release of ChatGPT.
And the piece was just kind of like, hey, people, this is the most important technological revolution of my lifetime, certainly, and it's coming, and the one thing you have to do is take it seriously.
The reaction to the piece was brutal.
That piece was the most controversial piece I've ever written in my life. I mean, I got so much hate.
Well, Steven got the last laugh because not only has that piece been totally vindicated, but it also led to a very interesting cold call from a team at Google Labs where they said,
hey, long-time listener, first-time caller, you don't know me, but we have this crazy idea. If we gave you a small team, would you want to come join Google Labs? And you've been chasing this dream research assistant your whole life. We think with language models, maybe you could actually build it. Would that be interesting to you? And I was like, yes, indeed. It would be very interesting.
So Steven, who had long wanted to use software to build the ultimate research assistant, joined Google, and the result is NotebookLM. You add articles, videos, PDFs, or other sources to your notebook, and then you can chat with them, or you can summarize them into new materials like a study guide, a mind map, or an AI-powered NPR-style podcast.
It was the most viral thing I've ever been involved with, actually, in my career.
It's been 2 years since the debut of those podcasts and NotebookLM's viral moment, so I wanted to check in with Steven because what he and the team at Google are building is fascinating. I love how it's changing the way that we learn and synthesize new information. I asked Steven who NotebookLM's power users are.
The power users are folks who have notebooks. It's where they've got, it's their American history class, and they've got 50 different reading assignments that they're working on. And to do well in the class, you really have to master the knowledge that's contained in all that. And Notebook now, in addition to things like audio overviews, in addition to just being able to chat with those sources and ask questions with citations and to read the original sources, you can also make quizzes, you can make flashcards, you can make amazing slide decks are my favorite new feature actually in the last 6 months, just visually incredible slide decks that you can generate to help you understand the material. Those are the power users. There's kind of another set of users where it's less about having a big complex notebook and more about translating one document into another format. So you're kind of I've got all the meeting minutes from last week and I want to review them on my way to work Monday morning. So I'm going to take this big file and just turn it into a podcast and listen to that podcast. So there's some folks who are kind of doing it as a one-off artifact creation tool, and then there are folks who are using it as more of a project-based tool.
Notebook started as a Google Labs product, but it's sort of becoming more integrated with Gemini.
The Notebook unit of knowledge is becoming really across Google, not just Gemini, but a kind of across Google standard as a way of bundling up a bunch of different documents. So it's just very useful with AI to be able to kind of define all the relevant sources for something that you're working on and then be able to point to that in different places. And so it's basically like the project bundle for Gemini now.
Okay.
And you'll see that invoked in more and more spaces around Google whenever you want AI in some form to like reference a knowledge base. What's interesting here is once you start thinking of the notebook as a bundle of knowledge, then you start thinking about it as a little bit of as a new format, really, right?
Mm-hmm.
So right now I have kind of two knowledge bundles that I professionally create, right? I write articles, and blog posts or, Substack posts, and I write books. But once you've built a really rich notebook with lots of interesting sources in it and cool artifacts that you've created, like audio overviews or slide decks, and maybe even you've crafted a persona for the model inside the notebook with custom instructions, that's a pretty interesting new format that you could theoretically sell down the line, right? There's something pretty intriguing there, I think, about notebooks. So about a year ago, we started this program at Notebook where we were producing these featured notebooks. And we worked with people like The Atlantic and The Economist and writers like Eric Topol and institutions like the Royal Society in the UK to curate these like really high quality notebooks with excellent sources, really nicely formatted sources, interesting artifacts. And we've done things like we did a partnership with Zillow for like a new home buying guide. Like if you're a first time home buyer, like a notebook is a great place to go for advice on something like that if the sources have been well curated. So this whole idea of a new kind of package for knowledge or expertise built into the format of the notebook is something we're super interested in. And there's going to be a bunch more on this front.
What surprised you about the ways that people are engaging with these featured notebooks, or what really excites you about how authors, publishers can use these?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I loved is we created one notebook that's basically just like the top 50, I think it is, companies around the world, their like earnings reports and their analyst calls and things like that. So it was just like a good kind of reference notebook. If you were a financial analyst and you were trying to figure out like what were the trends in the energy business in Q1, you could ask a question and get great answers. And that was the most, in the initial lineup that we did, like that was the most popular one. And then the second most popular one was the Economist World Ahead special issue, which is a great annual issue they do. So both those kind of made sense.
Large data sets in both those cases.
Large data sets where there's a very practical need to ask questions. But the third most popular one in the original launch, which is, as an old humanities person, this made me very happy, was we did a featured notebook of the complete works of Shakespeare. And that notebook continues to do really well because it's got all the plays in there. It's got all the poems in there. And, the world is filled with people who either love Shakespeare or taking Shakespeare classes in high school or college. And as a kind of a reference for those plays, it's an amazing space to explore. And one of the things that the models are really good at is, they've always been good at, actually, before even, we had chatbots, is translation. And, you can think about that as translating from French to English, but you can also think about it as translating from Shakespearean English to modern English, right? And so they're fantastic if you're in there and you're like, okay, what is really happening in this scene in Midsummer's Night's Dream? Like, I'm confused about the relationship here between... And it's just fantastic at walking you through the details of what's happening. And it's also great for finding quotes. Like, I'm writing a new book about the California gold rush. And so I ended up not using any of this, but I was like, okay, go through the complete works of Shakespeare and find any passage that in any way relates to gold. Like, and it doesn't have to even use the word gold. If it, there's all that glitters is not gold is obviously the most famous one, but it's something about, precious metals or anything like that. And it just like immediately like finds like 20 passages across the entire canon, like that are related to that, which is just the kind of search you could never do before that now you can do in 10 seconds. So that's been really cool to see. The other thing that it's not in any of the featured notebooks, but it's a great example of surprising use cases is we see a lot of users who are big role-playing game players. So think Dungeons and Dragons, right? And we saw this from the very beginning. It's been really cool. And I really want to do some more featured notebooks with RPGs because it's such a great use case. But if you think about it, D&D is a very text heavy game, right? It's a game that involves to play the game successfully, you have to like pull knowledge from a vast trove of like the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monster Manual or whatever, and all the campaigns that you're playing and the history of the game so far. And so basically what we were seeing is that dungeon masters running D&D campaigns for their players would load up all the documents into a notebook, and then they would, be able to dynamically query it as they were playing the game. But they would also record audio. This is the coolest thing. They would record audio of the game as it was being played, so that, the interactions between them and the players would be in an audio file. Then at the end of the session, they would upload the audio file to Notebook and have Notebook generate a podcast discussing the events of last week's
a play-by-play.
Adventure.
Yeah, a highlight reel. That is very fun. A side note, you said you're writing a book about the gold rush. My grandmother, she's deceased, but she was a pretty well-known writer of nonfiction for young adults. She wrote a book on the gold rush many years ago.
Oh, amazing.
So maybe that's in your notebook. I don't know. Rhoda Blumberg
is
her name. Yeah, children's librarians used to know her pretty well.
I love it.
Yeah. I'm thinking like, how would she, she was pretty tech savvy actually for the era that she was writing in. I mean, the fact that she was using word processors was interesting at the time.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that has been amazing since I started working on this book kind of in earnest is this is the first time that I've gone from just early ideation and exploring kind of potential topics to actually writing the book using Notebook the entire journey. So the last book I wrote, The Infernal Machine, I'd written most of it by the time I started at Google, and we certainly didn't have a working product that was advanced enough to really help me until maybe the very end of like the last mile of final edits and things like that. But this time, like I've gone from the very origins of the project all the way into actually writing where I am now. And I had a notebook that I created called The Next Book. And that was my kind of miscellaneous drawer notebook of just ideas where I was like, I wasn't sure what I was going to write about. And so it was like, yeah, maybe Gold Rush could be interesting, or maybe I'll write a book about the anti-nuclear movements in Europe in the 60s and 70s, or maybe I'll write a book about AI. I should maybe write a book about AI. And so I would just throw kind of random ideas in there and read an interesting article. I'd add it. Took a lot of notes actually in that notebook. And every month or so, I would kind of sit back and be like, okay, let's review what the main contenders are, and like let's think through like what's promising and what's not promising.
Yeah.
And that eventually led to me coming up with this idea for the Gold Rush book. And then I spun that off into a new notebook devoted just to the Gold Rush. And now we have all these research tools built into the product. I mean, this is in some ways the biggest change for me and how I use it in the last year has been the addition of fast and deep research. So you can send out your research agent inside your notebook and it will pull in sources based on whatever you're trying to do. And so now I have this notebook for the book itself that has, I think it now has 180 different sources in it and probably 50 to 60 different notes about various different things and quotes from my exchanges with the model. And it feels like I'm flying. Like it feels like my ability to just keep track of all the different data points and all the characters and all the arcs and all the back history about the geology of California and the formation of gold in the Sierras and all that stuff, which is just a very complicated network of ideas. I just open up the notebook and all the information is there in one place.
Yeah.
And I have this guide to it that will always find exactly what I'm looking for at the moment as I'm trying to write. So it's been really cool to actually see it at work in this way.
That is cool. What's a specific example where you say you feel like you're flying that's totally different from what you would have been doing, I don't know, 5 or something years ago?
Yeah. So there's a major character in the book named James Savage, and he is a kind of critical figure in the history of the Mariposa. Like it's kind of centering around this conflict around the discovery, the quote unquote discovery of Yosemite and a bunch of things that happened between 1850 and 1852. And so Savage travels west with this party in 1846, and his wife dies and newborn baby die right around when the Donner Party dies in the Sierra. So I'm kind of introducing Savage at this point. This is what I was doing over the weekend. And so I have this moment where I'm like, okay, I need a paragraph or so of detail about the extended party that they traveled west in, which was called the Boggs Party. And It's not a major point of the book. It's maybe 2 paragraphs at best, but like I should definitely have some color there to explain that. And so I'm just like, okay, first question is, in these 160 sources, like, do we have anything that's about the composition of the Boggs Party? And Notebook's like, well, there is this letter here from 1908 where they discuss this thing, and there's this one other letter. And I'm like, okay, that's super interesting. But go out and search the web and find anything else that's related to that. And it brings back like 10 sources in 15 seconds, brings them in. And then I'm like, okay, what are the key insights that we just got from those sources? So I get a summary of that. Then I go back and read the most relevant ones that seem really promising. And I actually see a book that they allude to. So I end up buying that book, and then I have to go read that somewhere else, which is a problem that hopefully someday we will fix.
Yeah.
So basically I built this like after about a very obscure topic, like one wagon train that traveled from Illinois or Missouri to the Sierras in 1846. I assembled this like really comprehensive knowledge base and got the key insights and was able to read the core documents probably in about 13 or 14 minutes worth of work. So there are things that, when I started writing in the 90s, like that would have taken maybe 4 weeks of work, right? Like I just getting physically to the libraries and getting to the material and figuring out what was there. And, it's been slowly compressing over time, and you could have had a bunch of open tabs and done a bunch of Google Scholar searches and done a bunch of other things and synthesized the information. But it's just orders of magnitude faster, and it's all in one place. And the thing that I think people sometimes don't understand until they actually use it is it's not just the speed of it and the fact that all the annoying things about tracking things down, are being eliminated with this kind of surface, but it actually makes it much more likely for you to stumble across surprising serendipitous connections, because you're able to kind of like explore like whatever pops into your mind. You're like, wait, what is the connection to the Donner Party in all of this? And you just ask the question. It's like, oh yeah, there was a really interesting connection to the Donner Party actually in all of this. They travel with the Donner Party for a long stretch of the journey. It's like, oh, that's amazing. Tell me more about that.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes people are like, yes, it's faster, but you're going to miss those like really interesting connections that you would only get by going very slowly through all the material. In my experience, it's just not right. There's like, it's much more connective, and you're able to follow the impulse of your curiosity with much less resistance in these kinds of systems. Like my problem with this book right now is that I have like too many threads, too many links, too many like serendipitous connections that I've stumbled across. It's trying to like, now I'm trying to contain them so that it turns into a coherent story. But anyway, it's been really cool.
That's cool. I mean, it sounds like you're having a ton of fun, which also I'm sure helps when you're writing a book that's going to take, well, I don't know how long it takes you to write books.
It's only going to take me about 2 weeks, apparently.
I mean, you just mentioned sort of, you alluded like cognitive offloading or the risk of cognitive offloading. I was going to ask you about that. Like, what do you do it sounds like you don't worry about it much for yourself. Is it a concern that you have for others as they engage with tools like this, that they're not deeply engaging and learning as they go?
Yeah. I mean, the way that I sometimes describe it is that if you were interested in truly understanding something, this is the greatest time to be alive. Like these tools are incredible at it. If your goal is to really get the knowledge that you are seeking into your head so that you master it, you have command of it, it's amazing how much better it is compared to just 3 years ago. But there's a flip side to that, which is that if you are interested in merely creating the illusion that you understand something,
right,
it is also the greatest time to be alive. And that's a real thing. I mean, it sounds like a joke, but I do take it seriously. We take it really seriously too. Like that is a particularly vexed situation for school. Creating the illusion of understanding something in the real world, in the workplace, is actually not a good long-term strategy, right? You could imagine you go into your job and you're like, you know what? I don't actually have to read anything that my boss says to me. I'm just going to feed it into, Notebook or Claude or Gemini, and it'll tell me what I should write back to my boss. And I will just I can just get a one-shot this, and get the answer back to my boss, and it'll be great. I can just sit here and play Tetris the rest of the day.
Right. And your boss will do the same back to you. It's okay. No worries.
Like eventually that will you'll hit a wall where someone will be like, Stephen, you don't understand anything that's going on in this company, right? There has to be the moment where you cognitively onboard the information, right? You can't just offload it, or else like you ultimately will run up against someone finding out that you actually don't understand what you're doing. But school is this weird environment, this kind of artificial environment where long-term, some subset of the students don't really care whether they understand the material. They just want the grade at the end of the year. They're not going to be a biologist. They're not interested in biology, but they have to take this biology class to get into college. And so the incentives to just fake it, if you can get away with it, are much higher than they are in the world outside of school. And so it's a legitimate issue. It's, I think, a solvable issue in the sense that, like, unfortunately, like one of the side effects of these tools is that they broke some forms of assessment. So there used to be, if you handed in a 5-page paper, unless you had like downloaded it, from the internet or something like that, if you had written it, it was a testimony to like the state of your knowledge. And now it's much, much easier to either one shot or, with a little bit of prompting, like create a paper on pretty much any topic, and it will be, presentable at least. And so it is a challenge, and we're trying to think through all the ways in which we can build Notebook as an educational tool that will like encourage people to actually write original papers using the tool, but not actually offload the thought that goes into a paper to the model itself. But that's the challenge.
How are you using, or are you, let me rephrase that. Are you using AI, Notebook, other tools to write? You've talked so far about how you're using it to organize, to find, to curate. When it comes time to actually put paragraphs together, what are you doing?
The primary way, I mean, it's a little bit unusual for me because I am a professional writer. So I need a slightly different kind of assistance when it comes to actually writing things, and that I need less of it. But I do find that, like, even as a professional writer, there are a million ways in which I am just locked in very predictable habits where you just kind of, there's certain ways of starting, sections of a book or chapters of a book that I just have done a million times, and I just default to them when I start a new chapter. Or there's, I think probably one of the biggest limitations I have as a writer is I just am not like my visual intelligence is like heavily impaired, and so whenever I have to describe what somebody looks like, I'm just like, oh my god, this is such a pain. I just want to talk about the ideas.
At
like,
least
why
you're
would I have to
self-aware
describe?
about it, though.
So they're just all these things that I don't feel I'm particularly good at, and I just get in these predictable habits. And I think every writer is like that, whether you're professional or not. And so what I use the model to do is to like kind of shake things up. And so I'll write a paragraph and then I'll say like, okay, the facts are all right here, but this is the most boring thing I've ever read in my life. Like, give me like 3 different alternative phrasings for this. We're just like, it's the same idea, but like the words are completely different. And it'll come back with like, a bunch of different variations, and none of them will be right, but there's something in variation 2 that kind of triggers a thought. And there's like, well, oh, that one word there is pretty cool. And what if I rewrote it here and I grab this here? And so I use it as a kind of like, it's a little like rolling the dice a little bit. Like you're just kind of, it's a little bit of a randomizer in some ways. And I find that is really helpful. Just last night, I had this idea for a very long sentence that would open a chapter that would be basically like, it was only after they did this and did this and did this and then did this and did this and then did this that so-and-so realized that she was with child, was basically the kind of like opening thing. And so it was going to be one of these like set piece like sentences that really like is a little nuts. And I wanted to have a lot of like detail in it. And so just as I was thinking about it, I was like, okay, give me like 3 variations of what that sentence could be. And again, all of them kind of wrong, but just being able to see them as little kind of trial balloons for like what the sentence could look like was super helpful in helping me kind of imagine it. So that's the way I use it. I think the harder question for folks who have great ideas, but don't necessarily, write for a living or don't feel great about their ability to take their ideas and turn them into phrases and sentences and paragraphs, is there's a new kind of writing that's possible, which is kind of like paragraph by paragraph directed writing, where instead of being like, okay, write an entire, business plan for me. Here's what I want. You're like, okay, let's start with here's my vision for the overall business plan. Now let's start with the opening paragraph. I wanted to introduce the concept of the startup and mention the key players. And then the AI writes that paragraph for you, and you edit, you tweak it, you get it right, you make sure that it's factually correct, whatever. And then you're like, okay, now next paragraph should discuss the value proposition, and it writes that. But at every step, it's writing based on the knowledge base that you've assembled, the thinking that you've done, so it's what it's functioning as is like a ghostwriter in a sense for your ideas. It's not authoring or creating or doing the cognitive work of generating your ideas for you. And I think that's the zone. Like, I don't need that because I love writing, but not everybody does. And lots of people have great ideas that struggle to get them into prose. And if AI can be used to genuinely just translate the ideas that are in your head better onto the page so that other people can read them, I personally feel like that's an appropriate use of the model. Even if the model is actually, the words are being generated, most of the words in the final product are originally generated by the AI. But I think that's a spicy take.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think what's important to you in the process you described was you said paragraph by paragraph. Yeah. It's not like, give me 5-page paper, or, give me a 10-slide business plan. It's that slow process. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, and it's a sense of, you have to know what you want to say generally. And that takes separate thinking and outlining and wrestling with the ideas. And so, if you're writing a business plan for your startup, like a bad way to use AI is to sit down with no ideas for what the startup should be and be like, hey, write me a business plan for a startup. Like that, I don't know, maybe that will work someday, but like that's not going to work today. And it's much better, I think, to sit there and do the conversations, do all the work that you would do, with the assistance of AI to think through what would be the best startup idea and have a sense of what you want the business plan to look like. And think about the key things you're trying to convey in it and probably draft an outline for what it should be. But then when it comes down to actually turning that into a full draft version of it, is it inappropriate to ask the AI to help you step by step to generate the first drafts if you are guiding it at every stretch of the process? And I think we honestly don't fully have the values or the writing ethics of how AI is used appropriately. That just hasn't been adjudicated yet.
What about the experience as a reader? I mean, I wonder if at some point we don't care, at a certain point, it was just obvious that photographers, they touch things up. There's Photoshop or whatever is involved. Like, you don't need to call that out. But I feel like right now, do you think you'd want to disclose that AI is doing some of the writing, or does this become a moot point in a couple of years?
Yeah, I don't know. I think we've all started to have that feeling of, you feel it a lot on Twitter, which I still call Twitter. Yeah. With these new essay formats where you're like, oh, that looks interesting. You start reading it and you're like, I'm not sure a human wrote this, and that instantly is not interesting to me, right? It has to have that human intentionality behind it for it to be interesting to me. But obviously these are degrees, right? Like I have no problem, it would never even occur to me to think this was spell checked by a machine.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Right. And then this was grammar checked by a machine with some stylistic suggestions. Absolutely fine. So then if you take it to the next step from there, which is the argument and the structure, the narrative, the ideas here were generated by a human, but the first draft of each paragraph was generated by an AI based on the guidance and instructions of the human. Do I start to feel that lack of interest at that point? Probably not. But to me, that's the interesting, ambiguous zone right now.
You spent a good chunk of your writing figuring out how good ideas happen. And I'm curious, with the use of AI, you talked about your own use of it to figure out what your next book ought to be. What are some of the interesting ways that you or others are able to use AI to come up with novel ideas?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that it's super interesting. So one of the big themes in where good ideas come from is that ideas come from concepts that migrate across disciplines. So someone comes up with an idea in physics and it kind of travels over into whatever, like I'm just looking at my guitars here, musical instrument design. And so they're like, oh, we understand this new thing about electricity and that's cool. And we could use that actually and to create the little voltage things that we're going to put into this microphone. And we can, or it's just metaphors that get carried over. Someone thinks about something a certain way and they're like, well, metaphorically, like what if we thought about the way that Einstein was thinking about relativity? Like what if we thought about the novel in that way? And, so that's often that cross-disciplinary connection that drives like creativity. And there are just a million examples of that in the history of innovation. So, but the challenge there is disciplines have their own jargon. And if you read actually like kind of cutting edge research in a given field, it often is meaningless to you if you're not an expert because you just can't make sense of it because it's experts talking to other experts. And so historically, you had people who did work like what I would do, which is like, hey, I'm going to go and write this book about, neuroscience, but I'll translate it into a lay audience. And then maybe in reading my translation of that material, you, lay reader, can take some of those ideas from neuroscience and put them to work in your software company or whatever it is that you're doing. But now there's a new translator, right? And now you have this other way of getting ideas that are complicated and turning them into actionable insights that you can apply to your work in some other field. I think that's super interesting. The other thing that's amazing about these tools is that they're capable of doing this kind of like inverted search. So classic search is like, keyword based, which obviously we've moved beyond, but it's like, find these things in these documents. Like I'm looking for things about the history of guitars. So find anything that relates to the history and the design of the electric guitar, and it goes and finds those things for you. But what's possible now is to say to these models kind of the reverse of that, which is like, okay, I've just written this history of guitars, but I've written it based on this like enormous body of knowledge that I've assembled in my notebook. Take a look at what I just wrote and let me know what I'm missing. Like, what did I not include in this essay that is actually really interesting? And it can go through, it's incredibly good at this. It can go through all your sources and be like, oh, the thing you didn't mention is this one crazy thing that happened in the 50s with Les Paul and the invention of the electric guitar. You should add that over here. And so you can you can search for the things that aren't there in this way, which is incredible. And, we've done some experiments with like, take a look at this literature on this particular scientific question and give me a list of unanswered questions, like unasked questions that would be relevant in this scientific literature. Like, look at all these papers and figure out like, what is the thing that nobody is thinking about yet that would be really interesting to start thinking about? And you get provocative answers when you ask those kinds of questions. So the ability to do those kind of inverted searches is super powerful. And I think people are just starting to realize that they can do it in the first place. Like we haven't even really exploited that at scale yet because it's such a counterintuitive idea.
That is very cool to like search for the negative space.
Yeah.
I want to ask about another concept you wrote about, the adjacent possible in one of your books. Inventions that are suddenly within reach because of other inventions that have come before them. What do you see as newly possible now that really excites you?
Yeah. It does feel like we're at this point. There are points in history where like the adjacent possible kind of expands and contracts. Like suddenly like electricity comes along and gets delivered to the home. And suddenly like, oh, there's a whole world of like consumer appliances that are possible. They just were not possible 20 years before that. And we are certainly in another mode like that. I think the biggest one is we're about to enter a period where we're going to finally live up to the promise of the original PC revolution, like the original personal computer revolution, where there was this idea that hobbyists were going to like write their own applications. Like if you look at the kind of like early days of, the mid 70s, it was kind of like, oh, it's fantastic. Like you should get your Apple II. And obviously you need to learn how to like program BASIC because like otherwise you're not going to have any programs and very quickly Gates figured out that actually people would pay for software that was made by other people. And we just went into this world where, 99% of the software was something you paid for that someone else created and you just hoped that it fit your needs. And we're already entering a world where people are like, hey, I think I could just build my own application that fits exactly the needs that I have. And, talk about an expanding adjacent possible, like the realm of like potential software applications that could be built to match all the needs of the world is just enormous. And this is one of these places where I think it's going to be very interesting to see the job market implications of this, because on the one hand, you can say, gosh, the AI can do all the coding, and so this is not a good time to be a software engineer because the machines are going to replace you. On the other hand, maybe the more likely scenario that I see is that the world is going to be filled with all these companies that never used to hire a software engineer because they would just buy their off-the-shelf software from someone else, and that was the only option they had. And so they definitely wouldn't have like an AI specialist like on their team if they were like a dry cleaner. Like, why would you have that, But it's like, well, actually, we could build this kind of amazing like custom dry cleaning app that we could use with our customers that they could use to check on their, the status of their dry cleaning. And all it costs is to have just one full-time employee working on that. And so suddenly the realm, you might see potentially, I guess, fewer at big software companies, but more at much smaller companies. And so, who knows? We're in a very ambiguous period right now on that front, but I think that's a real possibility.
Yeah, it's actually something that I had Paul Ford on the podcast recently.
Oh yeah, I know Paul. Yeah, back in the day, yeah, he's brilliant.
Yeah, he totally, and he talked about nonprofits and others, would previously not be able to afford custom software, or they just wouldn't, and now they can make it themselves.
Yeah, and I have a couple of these fake notebooks that I've created to kind of simulate different use cases, and nonprofits are a really great one. My mother has run a nonprofit for many years, and so I've been educating her about Notebook. And so I have a fake nonprofit notebook that's like a organization that's responsible for a town square and revitalizing the park, right? And so I've created all these fake documents and stuff like that just to test new features and how it would be used in that way. And Notebook itself is a really great tool for those types of organizations. And one of the things we're actively doing is making it easier to kind of do that agentic work inside of Notebook as well. And so that you could, maybe you don't need to build an application from scratch for your nonprofit, but you should be able to take a tool like NotebookLM and kind of modify it and push it in new directions inside the app to make it really applicable for your organization. Like, making for instance, a public notebook with all the documentation that you have for your organization so that you have transparency and that other people can go and ask questions. You put in all your like public board meetings or your committee meetings or whatever it is, and you could share that with the world as a knowledge base. And then you can build some special tools that maybe you would design yourself inside of Notebook. Like, that's very much our vision for where we want to be. And again, for organizations like that, it would have been really expensive to try and build, a special interactive chatbot app in the past. But now, between the existence of tools like NotebookLM and also the existence of these new coding tools that are basically, just tell it what you want it to build, it's a completely different world for organizations like that.
Yeah. What's the biggest thing that surprised you I know you have a notebook, you have many, but like, I know you have one with like tens of thousands of quotes you've collected over many years, right? Like, when you chat with it, like, what are some of the surprising things that you've uncovered?
Yeah, I basically kept until I started collecting digital versions of quotes from books that I read as research for my books and articles in the late 90s, really. Like, I just kind of was like, I'll just, in those days I would like type up the quotes.
Yeah.
And then once ebooks came along, you could kind of highlight passages and stuff like that. So I don't know if there's a single, I think the thing that always strikes me is just whenever I go back to that notebook, and it's often in the form of, I'm writing this paragraph about X. Is there anything in my reading history over the past 25 years that is related to that? The most surprising thing is that the answer is almost always yes, and that I have entirely forgotten about the thing that I read. That not only that I read 15 years ago, but that I thought was striking enough that I like highlighted the passage and like brought it into my collection. And so I just think we vastly underestimate like how much you forget. Like, I can feel it just because I've forgotten whole sections of books that I've actually written, much less like other books that I've read that other people wrote. And so it's one of the ways in which, again, I keep coming back to the idea that these tools are doing the opposite of cognitive offloading in a sense, because they're extending your memory and your ability to make associations with things that you can't, your brain generally like just can't do on its own. Like I actually have a really good memory, but the knowledge base of things that I've completely forgotten is so much, more vast than the stuff that I've been able to keep track of. And so to me, any kind of tool that allows me to re-trigger those associations and make those deep link connections to something that I read a long time ago is, again, it's exactly, I hadn't thought about this until we just talked about it. It's exactly the opposite of cognitive offloading. It's cognitive inputting. I'm going to write a whole piece about this. Thank you.
Oh, good.
Dan. Because it basically, I've got this offline collection of like things that influenced me that I thought were interesting. And I need a better mechanism for getting that back into my conscious thought. And so that I can work through that idea and apply it to what I'm working on now. And so now I think of a tool like Notebook, if you build the Notebook in the right way, as basically it's cognitive uploading is the way to think about it. And it can now dynamically, based on what I'm working on right at this moment, figure out the most relevant bits from like my whole history of ideas that influence me and put that into my brain so that I can think through it and I can understand it or make a new connection that I couldn't have made before. And that, I just feel like that's not, I don't know why, but like that's not yet part of the popular conversation about AI, and people don't appreciate that side of it. And it may be because people aren't using it the right way yet, and they don't have those kind of memory collections, second brain collections, the way a smaller group of people do. But boy, if you do maintain that kind of archive of your thinking and of ideas that influenced you, it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah. Cognitive uploading, that's a great phrase that you just taught me.
I just came up with it.
I like it. Stephen, thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed this.
Dad, it was such a good time.
This is Future Around and Find Out, and I am so excited to keep exploring with you, to keep steering the future in the right direction. Go to futurearound.com to get the newsletter, to ask questions of upcoming guests, and to find more ways that we can build a better future together.